Good evening, everyone. I'm glad to see you all here. It's a lovely evening. My name is Anthony Monta. I'm the Associate Director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies here on campus. As you know, the Nanovic Institute convenes a film series every semester. And this semester, it being the other of the every other semester, we convene the sort of best of European films in order to keep the series current, to keep you current with the best of what's happening in European cinema. So this semester we've had Michelangelo Framartino's Quattro Volte, Aki Kaurismäki's Le Havre, Lars von Trier's Melancholia. Later in April, I want to inform you that we're going to have Ralph Fiennes' new version of Coriolanus, the Shakespeare play, which is exciting. We've invited Mr. Fiennes, but alas, he's been in demand as Voldemort, as you might imagine Voldemort is. So we've not yet heard. He may drop into Notre Dame like one of the people in Harry Potter, but we don't know yet. We'll inform you if that in fact happens. But tonight, we are exceedingly pleased to be able to present Hans Steinbichler with his new film, and just how new this is, you're going to hear in a moment, Das Blaue von HIMMEL, or in English, Promising the Moon, loosely in English. First of all, Hans Steinbichler was born in Switzerland to Bavarian parents and grew up in Bavaria. During his studies, he worked as a photographer, which has been very important, he says, to his development as a filmmaker and as a journalist. He began, however, to study law, but broke this off at 26 to take up a course of study at the Munich Hochschule für Fernsehen und Film instead. And after shooting short films and biographical documentaries there, he presented his film Hirankel in 2003 as his graduation project. And if there are any students in the audience for his graduation project, which won some awards I'll tell you about, he had some very prominent film actors and actresses as part of that. It obtained the Advancement Prize of the Munich Film Fest for Best Direction, as well as the Bavarian Film Award, which is a very highly regarded film award in Germany, along with the German Film Awards, the national awards, and the Adolf Grimme Award, the German TV Oscar. And his acting ensemble, which included some great personalities of German film, as I said, was also honored with a German TV Oscar. 3 years later, he directed Winterreise, which again had a stellar cast. It was nominated for Best Film at the German Film Awards, the national awards. The lead actor won one of these awards for his performance. So again, Hans is known for becoming known for his superb way with actors. In 2007, he made an experimental film, and I want to mention this because it's sort of appropriate to Notre Dame, Autistic Disco, which is a drama about social outcasts that he developed jointly with acting students of an art academy, the Mozarteum, at the University of Salzburg. And it's interesting that he has been at university environments before and has worked with students before. We're excited to hear about such things. 1 year later, he shot a TV drama, My Mother, My Bride and I, which won a Grimme Award as director for it. And also in 2008, he shot a short film, which was a contribution to Deutschland 09, of which 13 German directors were invited to express their thoughts on the state of the nation through film. And that premiered at the Berlinale Film Festival in 2009. This film that you're about to see tonight is his brand new feature film. It just had its North American debut at the Miami International Film Festival on March 3rd and 4th, just a few days ago. So this is its third screening in the United States. So you are in for a treat, and in for a wonderful personality, and a very fine film director from Germany, Mr. Hans Steinbichler.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really honored by the words of Mr. Monta. It's too sweet for my person, I have to tell you what he said. I have to tell you, I was quite honored to be invited by a university like yours, because I visited Notre Dame 10 years before, because I was much interested in a person you grabbed away from German science. Vittorio Hösle is this man. In my eyes, a genius, and the Germans couldn't hold him, so you got him. He's amidst on your campus, go and see this person, Vittorio Hösle. I shot a film on him. He's a philosopher. And that's why I visited Notre Dame 10 years ago. And so I was very pleased when I received the invitation from Anthony Monta from the Nanovic Institute to come here and present a film. And I would like to invite you to this film because I speak to you as a German, definitely as a German. It's a film about Heimat. And Heimat is an expression in Germany for being at home, staying at home, for the relation to where you come from. And it's not quite transferable into the English language. There is no expression for it. And what I did discover is that I'm coming from a wonderful landscape in the south of Germany, and I was raised. I had pretty good circumstances when I was raised, and of course I had to deal with my history, and my history is quite simple. My mother was deprived from her home country, from Czechoslovakia, by the Russians. My father's origins are in Bavaria, but he had his parents were engaged in the Nazi party in the 30s, so I have quite a mix of what Heimat can be. It can be really good and really bad, and my films do all relate on this perception of Heimat. And the first two films I did, I dedicated them to my father because he was a figure I could find out what Heimat means in the best and in the worst angle. And this film you will see is dedicated to our mothers because, and this is my last sentence to this movie, when I started to ask my mother about her heritage and about where she came from, I realized that she would be silent for like 30 years or so. And when I started asking her, she had a diagnosis of Alzheimer. And it was an interesting thing that in the moment I wanted to ask her, she seemed to fade away. And with this recognition, I decided to make a film on that topic. A person that gets driven away from her home country and steps into a completely new life, and she takes something with her what is going to be revealed then in like 50 years or so. And what you will see is not the story of my mother, it's not the story of me, it's a fiction story on a topic that mostly interests me. It's about Heimat, losing Heimat, and it's about a very interesting disease affecting all of us, because we will grow older and older and older, and Alzheimer will be a cultural brother of our thinking, I do think. So enjoy this film. I would love to invite you to discuss it with me if you like. If you don't like, you just stand up and go away, and the people that stay, I would love to discuss. Thanks. Enjoy.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have a rare opportunity to talk with the director. I'm sure that he would love to talk with you about the film that you just saw. So, Hans, would you be so kind as to entertain a few questions?
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So you're welcome to talk to me. Yes, go ahead.
How close are the languages Latvian and German?
The question was whether Latvian and German is or maybe a close language. It's absolutely not. So German and Latvian is totally different. Totally different. It's even not understandable for Germans and vice versa.
So how were the people able to communicate? I mean, do most Latvians know German?
There's a big tradition of German in Latvia. So, for example, like 200 years ago, German was a quite usual language in Latvia. And many people would keep it, even though when the Russians came into the country, they would keep the German language as a kind of a root, what they wanted to defend against the intruders. And since I traveled to Latvia sometimes for doing that film, I realized they even kept more the German roots they're having than the language of the Russians. They were invaded by the Russians like for 50 years, like 2 or 3 times. But of course, many of the Latvians know Russian as a language to go as a language of bureaucracy and so on. But many of them kept what they knew about German. That's what I realized there.
So what you're saying is that they would know 3 languages, their own language, German, and Russian.
Exactly. What I realized when I traveled to that country is many of the elder people speak proper German, and they were forced to learn Russian, of course. So many of the Latvians are three-lingual, I would say. Please.
Why did you set the movie in Latvia versus Pommern or Ostpreußen
How do you mean versus?
instead of? There's a big German population in Pommern or Ostpreußen, so why did you pick Latvia instead?
Okay, I can answer to that. For me, I tried to tell it in advance. I had 2 personal points why I get on that story. It was the story of my mother getting deprived from her own country, and it was her sickness, the diagnosis of her Alzheimer. But what I didn't want to is to tell a story of my own. So I was thinking, what would fit for that? And it came to my mind that what the Baltic states did to the freedom movement in Europe is tremendous. We forgot about because, as you may know, when their freedom struggle started, Gulf War I started, and no one would have evidence of that, what the Baltic states did to European freedom. So I have to admit too that I always had a great desire to get to know the history of the Baltic states and to know what happened there and even to see the landscape there. And so I decided to set it there. That was the decision for the Baltic states.
You probably mentioned this in the introduction, but I'm wondering why in the film you chose to emphasize the Soviet invasions and de-emphasize the German presence during World War II. I'm just curious.
I try to repeat. You're wondering why I emphasize the Russian invasion and not the German invasion, right? Yeah. The thing is, to tell a story in this way is quite difficult because everything seems to be very complex. And the most complex thing in this whole story is that when Germany entered Latvia, it was kind of a freedom movement for the Latvians. They would welcome the Germans. And the Latvians have a quite dark role concerning well, the Holocaust. They would work together with Germans, and I have to admit, I mentioned that in that movie. Yeah, I tried to mention it, but I didn't want to settle on that because it's very complicated to be clear on that. So I tried to make kind of some sentences who would point to that direction. And mostly important for the Latvian people is the occupation of the Russians. That was 3 times, and it was for 50 years, you have to see. So, but to get behind your question, I do not want to compare what the Germans did to to anyone with the Russians, of course. But on the other hand, I showed that movie in Miami 3 days before, and there were many Cubans in the audience in Miami. And they would tell me it's so interesting for them to encounter a movie where for one time Russian occupation would be a topic or would be treated. So they asked me the other way around. They were kind of, yeah, relieved that someone would treat this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I really appreciated the role of women in film. I think there aren't enough movies today that have strong roles for women. And just, not directly related to that, but in a similar vein, why did you choose Lucas to be a man and not a woman?
Well, the question is, why did Lucas choose to be a man and not a woman? You mean really, you mean the Lucas, the boy?
The boy, yeah, because then you would have had a grandmother
Yeah.
and then daughter.
Yeah. I have to admit I never came across this question. I can't answer it. There's no answer to it. But maybe I can answer it different. When working on the script, I realized in my last 3 features I did, I had situations, set up situations that were quite desperate and needed healing. And in those movies, they ended deadly. And with this story, or with this movie, I wanted to step forward in what I'm telling. And I decided that this mother, this old Eva, she has to have kind of a relief for that what she encountered. And so I decided she had to have a grandson. And that was important for me. That nothing, I mean, it's a woman that has been stolen everything, her life, her daughter, her husband, everyone. And so I wanted to have, as a gesture to her forgiveness, to Marga, I wanted to have her a grandson. And there were so many women in this film, so I decided to be fair and do it with a grandson. So I can't answer it, to be honest.
It was acted beautifully, by the way.
Thank you.
When the actors win an award, how does that make you feel as a director?
What you saw were, I think, the most crafted women actors that we have in Germany now. The older woman, Marga, played by Hannelore Elsner, she's quite famous. You might have seen her in some intriguing movies through the last 15, 20 years. And what was so interesting about Marga, about this woman, about this actress, when I was doing the film, it was much complication for me to think about one thing. I always had to defend what Marga will do, because I deeply think that she did what she did out of love. And she would go with me and defend her situation too. For example, when we were on the set and she met this young Eva that took her husband away, she would go to her and say, "Go away, you slut." It was a kind of getting into a role. And she would tell me, "Listen, I've loved this man. I had this man. He promised me everything. He promised to stay. And then he was stolen from me. So I had to act like this." Meaning, the persons with I dealt, they were deeply into their role. And everyone tried to defend that, what he's doing. So no one in this film, I think, is blamed or is taken to be a monster or whatsoever. Everything in this movie is understandable if you go into the character. So that's what I can answer to that. Please?
There was there's another famous German movie about recovering the past, or recovering the past, the movie series Heimat. And I suppose you certainly saw it, and this is rather different from that. Would you like to say something about whether that influenced you, or how you wanted it to be different or maybe similar?
This gentleman is referring to a movie, I guess it's Goodbye Lenin, what you're talking about.
No, Heimat.
Ah, you mean really Heimat? Ah, now I understand. I thought you were guessing which it might be. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, because I was asked some days ago about Goodbye Lenin, because you screened it here, I think. I'm sorry. Of course, perhaps I have to explain. We have a film cyclist in Germany that's called Heimat by Edgar Reitz. And of course, I can tell you, Edgar Reitz is one of my big idols. And he did the very core of German Heimat film, of course. And of course, I did relate on his work. And I mean, you've got such a great institute for film studies here. I mean, for example, what you saw now, the screening, is so excellent. I never saw it in this excellence. Really, it's amazing. Yeah, you can be proud of that. It's wonderful. I never saw that film in this sound condition. And why do I say this? You really should try to get this cyclist here to Notre Dame, because it's an important piece of Europe concerning the Nanovic Institute, what they are doing and what they're trying to do with Europe. And one could learn so much about what Heimat means in terms of and. So this film clearly relates to Heimat by Edgar Reitz, but what I want to say is, my first movie that I did tried to break up the old Heimat film. And I think this was my big chance to do it. You didn't see that movie. It was my first movie that tried to do this. And in a way, I also tried to break up with that, what Edgar Reitz tried to tell, although I loved him, or although he was an idol of me. But indeed, he's very important for me. Please.
Well, Hans, how does the theme of Heimat emerge from this film? Is it a matter of nostalgia, the Margot thinking of the Latvian forest, the seashore, or is it a matter of culture rather than place? How would you describe that phase of the movie? How did you try to bring out that aspect of this movie? Because Heimat seems to be of critical importance to this film.
The gentleman asked how I would describe Heimat, or what aspect of Heimat I described in this movie. I have to admit, I myself, I think this is my German soul or whatsoever, I strongly do believe in Heimat as a place where you belong, and you would never walk away. That's how I was raised. And I think that's pretty German in a bad aspect, and in a good aspect, in many aspects. What happens when you're trying to tell a story is that you get caught in your own Heimat termination. So my first movies were definitely like seeing Heimat as a place where I come from, where I do belong. And of course there's a sense of nostalgia in it. But in this movie, it's a fact that a person that had Heimat is driven away and has to go and has to leave his Heimat and is gone. And Heimat is a very delicate thing to talk about if you are German. So I try to be cautious. And for me it was very important, for example, to do not Ostpreußen, but Latvia. because I didn't want to refer to Ostpreußen as a Heimat, because referring to Ostpreußen as a Heimat, yeah, is indeed a dangerous thing. And it's not dangerous because I want to be politically correct or so. It's still traumatized, it's still unfinished in European history. We had very good persons who would try to explain and defend it. Marion Gräfin Dönhoff, she was a former editor of the Zeit. She did a wonderful job to explain to Germany what Ostpreußen means to us, and so on and so on. So what I try with Heimat is to tell, for example, an American audience, there are still traditions, there are still people that can stick to places without being nationalist or whatsoever. Nationalism is not a brother of Heimat. That's very important. The Nazis would abuse Heimat for their terms. They would abuse many things for their terms. Even they would abuse pictures and, yeah, and so on for what they wanted it to be. And for me, my chance as a filmmaker when I started with my first movie, I could, or I was allowed to use the word Heimat without being right-winged. And that was important for me. I think this is a step for Germany too, in terms of how could Germany go into the process of building Europe after destroying it. So for me it was a very humble try to set Heimat as a thing we should think about. For us it's very important. It's very important to explain this to other nations like America, where you get into the taxi and I've been driven by a Bulgarian, I've been awaited by a man whose origins are in Italy, and so on and so on. It's not like that in Europe. But we still open up, but we still have to declare that Heimat is an important expression for us, even for the Germans. Please.
Hans, could I ask you to say a few words about the production of the film? Specifically, I can imagine different stages. You have the conception and the development of the screenplay, you're identifying then settings and shooting, and then you have the editing process. Were there any changes or surprises, major decisions you made along the way, perhaps specifically in relationship to the ending? And then could you say a few words about your thoughts about the title of the film?
Oh, yeah. Okay, the question was about some production notes or remarks on production. The biggest challenge for me was, would make ends meet with those two layers, those two historical layers, Berlin 90s and 30s in Latvia. And I had an interesting thought about that. Will it match? Because the characters would be like lookalikes, like old Marga and young Marga, like old Eva and young Eva. Would it match because they would seemingly look alike? And I decided this can't be the conclusion. I can't bet on that. What I did, I tried to make an emotional trace between those two layers. I tried to work with both of the actors talking about emotional states they had to achieve, and I have to admit, in this movie, it functions, in my opinion, to get those two layers together, and not to believe, oh, well, where are we? Are we in that time or in that time? But it's emotional. It's not because we did many things that would go in the direction, yeah, they have to look alike, or we have to make match frames and so on. So this was one point. The other point was, as we deeply honorized what the Latvians did for European freedom, we wanted to rebuild their revolution. And so we set out with photographies and so on and tried to build up this place again where they did their revolution in front of the parliament. And it was surprising because when we were shooting, people would show up being like in their 40s or 50s, and with tears in their eyes they would look on this setting and say, well, it's like as I would stay 20 years ago. And this was very retrieving for us, or wonderful, that the Latvians themselves helped us to do this film and really appreciated what we did. So this was also kind of a notion we had in the production. And if I may say so, one goal in this movie was, it's a very hard story, and I wanted to embed this story in the way you saw it. I wanted to have this certain kind of music. It's done by Nicky Reiser. He's a quite well-known composer who did, for example, the music for Nowhere in Africa. And of course, I wanted to have the language of the camera, what you saw, that really takes you into that movie so that you can cope with the story. I wanted to do a movie, if I may say so. So, of course, I'm endangered always a little bit that it's getting like in direction pathos or kitsch, yeah. But I hope I could go away from that, or you could bear. That's what I can say. And the last thing, your question, the title of this movie. I have to say, the translation is really bad. I was not asked, yeah, I have to say this, I'm hands-on on everything on that movie, but the foreign distributor, he told me he wants to set out with Promising the Moon, and I didn't like it at all, because Das Blaue vom Himmel is something different. It's different. So I'm not quite happy with the title Promising the Moon, but I think it's good to name this movie Das Blaue vom Himmel. Das Blaue vom Himmel is a German expression for a lie, but it's a lie with positive aspects. It's what you want to make out of your life without being it. So I can understand that. So far for the title. Please, sorry, Mr.
Yes. Two questions. How has this film been received in Germany, and can you cite any other German films or filmmakers who have influenced your career in a more general fashion?
How was this film received in Germany? Well, you have to see it as an art house film, so-called art house film in Germany. So we didn't play it in multiplex. Multiplex are really bad, big sin. Not bad. Sorry, this was Freudian. I don't know. Really big cinemas where you played some kind of good movies. But this movie was played in art house cinemas, and so we gained. Now we are gaining around. It's like 100,000 round 100,000 viewers. That would be in America like 400,000 or 500,000 viewers for an art house film. So this is not a success at the box office. But if I give you the pitch of this movie, an old woman who has Alzheimer tries to kill the, and so on. So it was quite hard to finance this film, but I thought it is important to tell this story, because it tells some things that were untold so far. And the second thing, I'm mostly influenced by American directors, I think. So the first important American movie I saw, you will laugh about it or not, it was Silence of the Lambs by Jonathan Demme. And Silence of the Lambs, for me, is an absolutely masterpiece in filmmaking history in many aspects. And for example, Mike Figgis, a British director, is quite an idol of me. But in Germany, there are two directors that influenced me a lot. The one is Tom Tykwer. Tom Tykwer, he did, for example, Run, Lola, Run, what you might know. And of course, he did some films I don't understand because he's so brilliant, but still, he's someone whom I adore very much, very much. And yesterday we had a very interesting talk here with the Nanovic Institute, and Vittorio Hösle, he asked me to my relationship to Fatih Akin. And Fatih Akin is a Turkish-German filmmaker who is really, really good and well-doing. And he, as he sees the German and as he reflects his history, direction Germany and vice versa, is brilliant. So I'm stuck on my little Heimat film, you know, in a way. And of course there are some directors that go beyond. But as I told you, I have some things to sort out still there. And if I'm not finished, I have to stick to that, and then I can go further. And for example, to be with an audience like you, of course, enlarges my perspectives, really. So, is there a question left?
Has there been a reception in Latvia of this film?
Oh yes, yes. This was mostly wonderful. We brought that film to Latvia, and there is no such a movie from outside Latvia that deals with Latvia, and they were really grateful to this story, I have to tell. And as you might have seen, the actresses and the Eva, the young Eva and the old Eva, both are two Latvian actresses, and I was stunned by them. I was casting in Latvia. I mean, it's so small. They have a film industry where they do 1 or 2 films a year like this, yeah. But they're having a theater tradition, and they're having a singing tradition, and a tradition that keeps, you know, they're learning poems, they give them oral, and so on. And when you see that faces, it's like Strindberg, it's like, I don't know, I saw those women and I was stunned. And I'm really wanting to work on with those actors from the Baltic states. They are refreshing and stunning and marvelous, really. So, I don't want to nail you on your seats anymore. Thank you so much for being here.